Hey everyone, I'm Michael, and welcome to another LittleBigPlanet tutorial. In this video, I want to cover a topic that was in the live stream the other day. By the way, thanks to everyone who showed up to that live stream. It really meant a lot. It was one of the most active live streams I've ever done in my life. A few of you guys from Trixel Creative even showed up, which was awesome. If you haven't already, feel free to join the Discord server, because that's where you'll find out whether I do another live stream and when. I'm probably going to do one this Saturday, but I don't know how that day is going to look like yet, so I'll keep you guys posted, as long as you're in the Discord server. But anyway, in this video, we're going to be talking about rigid connections, tag sensors, and remote tag sensors, and the benefits and drawbacks of each, which is a topic that came up in that live stream, and that I feel like should be its own separate video. So I'm going to get started here, and let's get into this. So in this level, I have a dynamic thermometer level. You can tell by the fact that the thermometer is currently green, instead of it being its usual red. What I have right here, right next to Sackboy, is a rigid connection. When I flip this switch, the light it's connected to will turn on. Over here, I have a proximity connection, which means that if I grab this grabbable object and drag it toward the light turns on when the object is close enough. The next thing that I have is a button here that when I press the button is going to broadcast an event to another area in the level and turn on a light that is currently off right now. As you can see, this light is turned on. So, let's talk about each connection style, and I'm going to start with the rigid connection. In LittleBigPlanet, a rigid connection is any two objects that are glued, bolted, strung, or wired together. So, for example, this cardboard object here is glued to the light, which makes these objects rigidly connected. The light is wired into the switch, which means these objects are rigidly connected. And what this means is it's effectively like connecting your PS3 to your PS3 controller. There's a USB cable in the loop. It's a hard connection. Once you reach the length of that USB cable, you can't go any further. And in LittleBigPlanet, you can go as long as you want with a wire, but I want you guys to treat these wires as if they do have a maximum length. Because, let's think for a second. If you're using your PS3 and your PS3 controller, you generally are sitting in front of your TV, or your monitor as it were. You're near your console. Or you're not even using the console at all, the controller's just sitting next to it, charging up overnight or something. You wouldn't, for example, do what I'm about to do, grab your PS3 and just casually hook it up in your neighbor's house with your controller in your kitchen and try to use it. You see, it's not going to work out well. The PS3 is not going to be visible to you, so you can't even use it. And there's just a logistical nightmare in that your neighbors might shut off your PS3. They might get mad that you've broken into their house. The weather might destroy the USB cable. Where do you even find a USB cable that long? Etc., etc. In LittleBigPlanet, the same idea applies. There's a logistical nightmare involved in this type of connection when the object is far away from the switch. First of all, there's a really long wire. Though there's only one wire in this case, you can imagine how this would look if there were 10 wires coming out of the switch. Where are they all going? What are they all connected to? And good God, what happens if you need to edit them? But that's not the only problem. The other problem is with loading zones in LittleBigPlanet. If I lock my loading zone, what's going to happen is the game's going to look at what's loaded around Sackboy. And whatever that area is, it's going to keep that area loaded in, and all of its dependent objects. Let's fly over to that other area, which is way outside of Sackboy's loading zone. As you can see, there's a floating cardboard object here with a light connected to it. That's loaded in. The cardboard is loaded in because the light is glued to it, because it's a rigid connection. And the light is loaded in because there's a switch in the other area connected to the light. This is what rigid connections do in LittleBigPlanet. That's because rigid connections are codependent. If one of the objects is loaded in, all of the rigidly connected objects have to be loaded in. So, since this switch that's all the way over there is loaded in, because our loading zone is locked, it's connected to this light, which means this light has to be loaded in by the game. Now, this is going to be okay for, an object that's this simple. It's just an on-off switch on a light. But imagine if it's a sackbot, which sackbots take up a lot of space in your thermometer. Imagine if it's a huge contraption with lots of complex vertices and logic associated with it. It's going to take up a lot of thermometer space that's not being useful to the player because, well, the player's not there. They can't see it, therefore it's useless. So that's what rigid connections do, and that's what's bad about them in LittleBigPlanet. So rigid connections, you should really only use them if you want a reliable, short-range connection. If it would make sense in real life to have a cable connected to it, then it would make sense to have a cable connected in LittleBigPlanet, is what I'm trying to say. The next thing I'm going to go over is this proximity connection. This uses a tag and a tag sensor, and this is sort of what you would do in LittleBigPlanet 1 with a magnetic key and a magnetic key switch. It's the same idea. For example, you might have an object or a character in a level that's missing and you have to rescue it. The whole mission is to rescue that character, and you need to bring it to their friend or their parent or whatever. And the parent won't let you through the level until you do so. That is the perfect use of a magnetic key switch and tag sensor in LittleBigPlanet. You drag the object, you rescue the character, you bring it to whoever needs them rescued, and then that lets you through the level. That's a great use of these. The problem with these comes from LittleBigPlanet 2. In LittleBigPlanet 2, it became common practice that we would use these tag sensors as a way to communicate messages wirelessly, because of course rigid connections become hard to manage after a while when there's a lot of them. For example, with controllinators, you might want to broadcast in a pinball game when you press the R1 button to make all of the flippers in the pinball machine flip up, all the right-facing ones. That's very annoying and logistically impossible to do with a rigid connection, but very easy to do with a tag and a tag sensor. You give all of the flippers a tag sensor, and you put one single tag on the controllinator, wire it up to R1, and there you go. You've got wireless communication. And in LittleBigPlanet 2, we could definitely take advantage of that, and the way to set it up would be to go into our tag sensor, tweak it, and set our maximum detection range to infinite. As you can see, it now behaves as an event signal. That is, when the tag is activated at all, for example, this grabbable object here, when the tag is activated, the tag sensor activates as well. It can be anywhere in the level, it will activate. Now that was fine in LittleBigPlanet 2, and indeed it is fine in LittleBigPlanet 3 static thermometer levels. It's a problem in dynamic thermometer levels. Let's fly over to the other area, after unlocking our loading zone. Now let's lock our loading zone. And fly back to the other area, that should now be unloaded. As you can see, the light and its cardboard pedestal is still loaded in. That's because, again, these objects are glued together. The light and the cardboard are glued together. They're a rigid connection. Not only that, but the tag sensor and the light are wired together, which makes another rigid connection. But not only that, well, the tag sensor has an infinite range. And in LittleBigPlanet, anytime you have a range tweak like this, that defines the size of this logic node's loading zone. That means, well, the way loading zones work in LittleBigPlanet, to my knowledge, is Sackboy has a relatively massive loading zone compared to everything else in the level. And you can tweak it in the global stuff. Anything that has a loading zone that overlaps with Sackboy's loading zone will be loaded in by the game, along with their dependent objects. So, what happens when we have an infinite range, which again, the range determines the size of the loading zone of this object? The loading zone becomes infinite, which means that Sackboy's loading zone will always overlap with it, which means the object will always be loaded in. It has to be. So, this is a problem. We don't want this object loaded in until it needs to be. So to fix this is not to use these infinite range tag sensors in LittleBigPlanet 3. You just don't want to. I would limit these tag sensors to only be for proximity-based connections. As you can see, once I set a range on the object, it has disappeared. It's unloaded, our thermometer went down a lot. Let's unlock our loading zone. So, let's say you do need to broadcast an event to another area in the level. For example, maybe you have to rescue a character. Maybe you have to grab this object, bring it over here, and that completes a puzzle. And maybe completing that puzzle opens up another door in the level that's way over in the distance, way outside of the loading zone. Well, how do you broadcast that event? Well, you can't use a rigid connection because then that area will be loaded in, and that's not good. You can't use an infinite tag sensor because it's going to keep that object loaded in, and that's not good. You can, however, use a remote tag sensor. That's what this button is. If I go into this chip, you'll see that we have two things in here. We have a preloader and a tag. I'll get to why there's a preloader in a moment. If we fly over to the other area where that light is, we have two things in here as well. We have a remote tag sensor and a selector. I'm going to reset the selector for the sake of demo. Now the light is turned off. The difference between a remote tag sensor and a regular tag sensor is that the remote tag sensor has no range on it, which means it has no loading zone whatsoever. That means that the object it's attached to is the burden of the loading zone, which means that Sackboy needs to be standing near the object for it to load in. The sticker panel needs to load in before the remote tag sensor will. The remote tag sensor doesn't have a loading zone. So, this might sound like a problem if you understand loading zones in LittleBigPlanet. The problem being that if you try to broadcast something from way out in the distance in the level and it's not loaded in, you're not going to receive that signal. You have nothing to receive it with. Which is why we get to this preloader. We have the button connected to both the preloader and the tag. The preloader is set to full load, and the zone is set to the area where this light post is. So what we do when we hit this button is we activate the preloader, which loads in the area, our thermometer jumped up, and then we activate the tag to cause the light to turn on. When we step off the button, the preloader will deactivate and unload the area. As you can see, it's not loaded in. But, since we hopped on the button and we had a selector attached to it, the selector was able to remember its state after being unloaded, and when it reloaded in, it was set to port number 2, which turns the light on. You'll also notice that the tag is turned off. That's because the button's no longer being pressed, and it's not even loaded in. But as you can see, we were able to preload this area in when we push the button, communicate the event, and then when the player stepped off the button, we unload the area because it's no longer needed. However, since we have a selector here, the game will remember the state of this area, and so when Sackboy does get over here, he will be able to see the fruits of his labor. He rescued the character, and therefore the light turns on and he can progress through the level. So, to summarize this video, if we fly over here, these rigid connections are great for very small range connections that would make sense to be wired up together in real life. So this switch turns on the light, and that's that. They're close by, they're not far away. This is a good case for a rigid connection. Regular tag sensors are good for proximity, like you would in LittleBigPlanet. You take an object, you have to drag it to the specific area, and that activates the tag sensor. And remote tag sensors are good for broadcasting events throughout the level, and also giving flexibility so that when you want to broadcast something to a faraway area, you load that area in for the time you need to broadcast the event, and then you can immediately unload the area when Sackboy no longer needs to broadcast that event. So I hope that clears things up. I hope that better explains what these different types of sensors and connection types are for. They're a thing I use in my level frequently. I will use rigid connections for things that make sense to be rigid, like, for example, elevator doors being attached to, like, a selector or something that's attached to a player sensor on the elevator door. And then I will use these for, like, sack bots that need to get to a specific area. And I'll use these for event broadcasting, like when I push a button down, whether it be this type of button or a controlinator or whatnot. I'll use these to broadcast events, and that's a perfect use for them, because the remote tag sensor needs to be loaded in before it can receive the event. So hopefully this gives you a lot more flexibility in your levels, and makes it a lot easier for you to optimize your dynamic thermometer levels. And with that said, that's going to do it for this video. As always, I've been Michael. I hope you learned something, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you on the Discord server, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.